Hello, beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing really well. I'm just going to take a brief moment to chat about Saturn retrograde in Aquarius. That's going June 4th to October 28th. But I think more importantly, I want to reflect on Saturn just for a moment today. This is a topic I actually feel really strongly about because Saturn kind of gets a one-tone reading often in the general pop astrology world as being about restriction and punishment and kind of hard times. And I find that to be inaccurate and also not very helpful. And not very in tune. And the thing with Saturn in general as an archetype is this is a very multifaceted and very open to interpretation energy. And the way that this archetype has been written about, explored, and connected with, depending on the culture, the time frame, who's talking about Saturn, it is going to vary widely from a very healthy, loving, supportive energy that wants things to go well and it's a time of prosperity to a very destructive and abusive figure. And I think that's why Saturn often is such a sore point and it causes a lot of stress for people who are just getting into astrology or just starting to understand it because there is such wide variability in how you talk about this archetype. Because in essence, this is the father archetype. This is about a parent. And when we're working with any of these archetypes, this is also about our inner family system. Therapists out there, anybody who's into therapy and these strategies for working with our internal world will understand this completely, but we have a way that we inner parent. And I think the way that we connect with Saturn's energy and the way we think about it, the way we write and weave stories and we think about Saturn moving through different signs, different transits, often reflects how we are inner parenting ourselves and the relationship we have built with that part of ourselves that helps us feel safe and structured and cared for. You know, when we look at Saturn in kind of ancient Roman, very general discussion here that we're talking about, you know, Saturn had to do with sowing seeds, sowing crops, and this being a time of plenty and of like good, beautiful things, a golden era. This was often the archetype of that prosperity, of that agricultural prosperity, actually. You know, but Saturn's also been reflected in different cultural things. Like if you think about Goya, a painter from the late 18th and early 19th century who lived in a very turbulent political time and who explored a lot of shadow sides of himself and the world that he lived in. There is a famous painting of Saturn devouring his son. And that painting shows a Saturn that is destructive, that is looking to destroy ourselves, you know, our lineage, everything, and is so afraid of being ousted from his position of power that he eats his own children. So you can see here that who is this Saturn? How do we pin down this archetype? How do we work with this archetype in a way that is healthy for us? Because you really can't find one reliable reflection of this concept of Saturn over the last 2,000 plus years that you're going to be able to say this is it. So what do we do from here? What do we do from here? How do we work with Saturn? What can we do here in this moment? You know, Saturn has been in Aquarius. Saturn first went into Aquarius in March 2020 and had a short little stint there, then went back to Capricorn for a little bit. And then basically all of 2021 and all of this year so far, we have Saturn in Aquarius. And this is Saturn in Aquarius this time around. It's last time in retrograde in this sign for another 28 years. Next year on March 2023, Saturn is going to move into Pisces. That's going to be a whole different conversation. But the one thing I will say is this is our last Saturn retrograde in Aquarius. This is a great time to integrate. It's a great time to reflect on our inner parenting and how that affects the way that we show up in the world. Because Aquarius is about the collective energy. And we can look at some of the things that have been going on these last couple of years and really think about how we have had massive collective changes. We've really had to reevaluate what matters and how we show up in that collective journey, how we contribute to it, how we share our beautiful energy in an effort to come closer to deeper truth. and to caring for each other and for caring for our planet and all of those beautiful things. I mean, that is essentially what Aquarian energy is all about. And Saturn actually originally ruled Aquarius. And a lot of times Saturn, is going to be, is often touted as being about the restriction, the contraction. And funnily enough, when we're talking about that Goya painting where Saturn is depicted as devouring all of his children, the child that survives, the sixth son, is Jupiter, who then ousts him. And Jupiter is this planet of expansion. And there's this kind of, in that storytelling, in that version of the story, there's this war between restriction and expansion. There is this tension. There is this disagreement, this fundamental disagreement between restriction and expansion, between punishment and reward. And this is what I really want to dissolve here, because if we start to think about Saturn as about punishment, as about motivation via fear of consequences, via this kind of idea of joyless discipline, of lack, of restriction, of stripping back, we are not going to be interacting with Saturn in a way that helps us understand ourselves. We are simply going to be replicating what's been used for a lot of people in many cultures in many time periods for a very, very long time, which is this idea of restriction and punishment, of scarcity, of stripping away. And this isn't going to really get us to any new places or any new insights in our own internal worlds, in our own internal journeys as individuals experiencing the world as a separate entity, and also, therefore, in how we show up in our communities and in the collective experience. So it's better to think about Saturn, I think, first of all, as a very loving, nurturing, caring inner parent figure. And this is one that we're going to have to write and create for ourselves. This is one that is not, there isn't going to be a cookie cutter formula for each one of us that we can all just apply to ourselves. We're going to have to work on exploring what that looks and feels like to us. What does that feel like when it shows up in our internal world? What does that look like in the day-to-day? What does that feel like? It is really going to be different for every single one of us. Some of us, that is going to be about having a more strict routine because that makes us feel safe. Some of us, it's going to be about being a little bit more open, simplifying, getting back to the basics, getting into a little bit more of the Taoist way of doing things, which is to simplify every day, take something out kind of approach. There are many ways that we can each individually explore our own internal Saturn figure in our lives. But essentially, Saturn is about the simplification of things. It's not about punishment. It's not about the forced motivation based on what bad things might happen. It's not about, also there's this kind of culture where there's this, in the wellness culture, I think there's become this battleground between this isn't really self-care and this is really self-care. Bubble baths aren't really self-care. Self-care is really, really hard, torturous healing. And to me, this is not a dichotomy. This is not a scales where you weigh these things out. There is these things can work together, and Saturn is here for each and every one of those things. And it's really just about simplifying and getting into the flow with ourselves and getting into a deep state of trust. And if we go back to kind of that most simplistic rendition of Saturn as the sower of seeds, as kind of this it's also an energy of time and things that evolve and grow out of seeds, out of the ground, out of the hidden and invisible. So this is also an energy that is about giving ourselves a little deeper trust and getting into a deeper trust with ourselves. So I think for me, I just want to take a moment. This Saturn retrograde is going June 4th to October 28th. And this is a great time to think about what your internal relationship with this archetype, with this idea of Saturn is, and to make it something that feels loving to you. Because most of us, when we are presented with the archetype of Saturn, if we have painful associations with figures of authority, with father figures, with parent figures of any kind, with things that have to do with structure and pain, we are going to be reflecting that in how we connect with Saturn. And this is where we want to heal. This is where we want to soften up and start to actually do the creative process of creating that internal parental figure that feels really, really loving and good. And this is the perfect opportunity to do this. And I think this is important on the collective level, because the more of us that have a loving, clear, specific inner parental energy that we work with, that we listen to, that we generate, then the more of us are going to be able to show up on this collective journey in a way that feels open and kind and loving. We really can't do that, share our energy, share our light, if we aren't working with that inner parental self and checking with it and creating with it and seeing how it's feeling for each of us. And this is the perfect opportunity to do that. This is a longer transit. It's one that's kind of going on in the background of the things that are happening in the daily and weekly environments that we may be in. So we don't need to, hyper focus on this, but it is a theme that I think will be woven through the next 5 months. And it's a great opportunity to just notice. Just notice, what is your relationship to Saturn? What does it make you think of? What's been your relationship to the last 2 years? What have you been learning about your internal parenting relationship? What have you been learning about the parental figures and cookie cutter shapes that we have for parental figures in our collective journey, generationally, as well as in this present moment? And how has that elapsed and shaped the way that we treat ourselves, we treat each other, and the way that we punish or reward ourselves? These are all the questions that I think doing any work with Saturn will bring up. And it does ask us to get really honest, but I think it can also be a time of joy and prosperity. And like I said, this is about sowing of seeds. This is about ideas coming to light. This is about hope and warmth as well. It's not just about this hard healing journey where we go and we cry and we feel horrible emotions. This is also can just be as simple as feeling calm and at peace. And finding that peace in ourselves and finding that trust in ourselves. I have to admit this first half of this year, I've been holding myself really tight, really, really tight. Just going through my haunted house of all the things that could go wrong as I've been growing and changing so drastically in such a small amount of time. I've had to really take the time to look at that internal Saturn, the one that maybe is looking at all the things that can go wrong and trying to control and be more of that Goya's version of the painting Saturn. And I am really working right now on coming back to that joyful, loving Saturn that just wants so many beautiful things for me, is going to help me to show up to each of those little tasks that help me be here and sow each of those little seeds. So I know that I'm definitely going through this journey of reflecting on this, and I hope this is helpful. I hope this is a great way for you to maybe connect with it and a different way to think about Saturn, and some of the things that have come to mind over the years doing work with this archetype. So have a beautiful Saturn retrograde. Also, I am going to be doing worksheets and deeper discussions on this Saturn retrograde as we move through it over on my Patreon. That's really where you're going to get behind the scenes and time to hang out with me and weekly support. So I would love to see you over there. I will leave the link for that below. I would love it if you subscribed and stuck around. This is a space that means a lot to me, and I'm going through a lot of changes. So for those of you who have stuck around, I appreciate it so much. You can find me on Instagram as well. There's only one true Sarah Verba. There's some dupes still floating around out there. Hopefully that's dying down a little bit, but there's only one handle to follow. And I think that's about it. I will leave all my goodies in the description box for you, and I hope you have a beautiful coming 5 months.